Welcome to the Givology Impact Series podcast. Givology is a 100% volunteer-run online giving marketplace for education, which connects donors to grassroots projects and student scholarships around the world. Each episode, we share the stories, advice, and inspirations of social entrepreneurs and changemakers around the world in education. I'm Amy Fan, your host for today. Today, we have invited Iain Guest. He is the executive director of the Advocacy Project, a nonprofit that seeks to help community-based human rights advocacy groups by sending fellows to the affected area. Welcome, Iain.
Well, thank you, Amy. Nice to talk to you.
Nice talking to you, too. So, how did the Advocacy Project get started?
Well, it got started back in 1998 when I was asked to put together a team to go down to Rome and help the campaign for an international criminal court. They were governments were meeting in Rome to draft a statute for an international criminal court, and I put together a team and we went down and produced an online newsletter on the conference, and of course that conference led to the drafting of quite a strong statute, and then we continued our work after that as the Advocacy Project, and we've been going strong ever since.
So how big is it now?
Oh, it's tiny, and we want to keep it that way. If we raise money, we want all of the money, or as much as possible, to go to our partners in the field. And we have a very small staff and a small office in Washington. But we have an extensive network. We have about 40 to 50 people who volunteer with us every year, including interns, quilters, peace fellows. We have quite a large network of partners around the world. So we're a very small organization, low on budget, low on overhead, but I hope big on impact.
So how do you choose the organizations you partner with?
They choose us.
Really?
We do not want to go in and sort of impose an agenda, which we think is a mistake that's made by too many aid agencies. We put it out on our website, what we do and how we can help, and we wait for people to contact us, which they do. We get large numbers of people who find us online or hear about us through their own donors. And then we will send a volunteer, a graduate student, we call them peace fellows, who will go out and work with the partner organization for several weeks. And if we both feel that it's a good fit, then we can build a long-term program together.
So going back to something you said earlier, I heard that you mentioned quilters as part of the people on your team. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, let me just first of all explain our model of support for these community-based partners, because that's quite important to get that clear. We want to help groups that find it very difficult to attract support and get their message out, and in fact face a lot of pressure. So we call them marginalized communities as a sort of general term. But they include people like the travelers in my own country, the United Kingdom, gypsies, Roma, waste pickers in India, the river gypsies in Bangladesh, the Dalits in Nepal, women who've been attacked and sexually violated in Africa. So these are communities of people who have suffered from poverty, discrimination, and have huge needs, but those needs are not being met. And we feel that their first need is to get their message out. If people don't know what they're doing, they're not going to attract donors, they're not going to have any traction. So that's really what we do. When we send our volunteers out, the first thing they do is to help their host organization put out the message. And that's the sort of core. Once we've built that foundation, and both partner organization and ourselves, we have some content, we can describe the work we're doing, then we can work together to build a longer-term program. Now, the quilters come into it because not very many years ago, 2007, we realized that many of the women in these different communities around the world like to use sewing. And so we suggested to our friends in Bosnia, where we work with a group of widows, people who lost their husbands in a massacre, we suggested that they might use their weaving skills to commemorate their loved ones who were killed in this massacre at a place called Srebrenica, and then use the woven product, the quilt, if you like, as a way to tell their story and get their message out. They did it brilliantly. And in fact, those quilts in Bosnia were shown this summer on the 20th anniversary of the massacre. Bill Clinton, of all people, was there and was standing in front of an array of the quilts. So quilts can be a very powerful way to tell the story. And we have gone from Bosnia to other partners around the world and suggested this. And all of them have jumped at the opportunity, and we now have an amazing collection of quilts. Many of those quilts, however, are put together here in the United States. The women in the global south, in Bosnia, Nepal, wherever it might be, will produce the embroidered panels, and then we will bring them to the States, and they will be assembled into quilts by quilting guilds here in America. So, typically we have between 10 and 15 quilters a year who will be helping us to put quilts together. But the core idea, Amy, is that it's important for community-based advocates to tell their story. And sometimes that story can be told through social media, Skype, profiles, photographs, but sometimes it takes a different way to get the message out. And we have found that embroidery and weaving is one such way.
Mm-hmm. Since this is an audio recording, would it be possible for you kind of to describe one of the quilts that have been made, kind of just visually?
Well, as I said, we now have an amazing collection of quilts, which we regularly show at exhibitions. And we have, for example, one from Uganda that was made by people with disability in the north of Uganda, which we'll be talking about presumably in a moment. I think that the first quilt from Bosnia was quite simple. It just carried the names of people who had been killed in this massacre. It was powerful. It was simple, but it was powerful. We then took that idea to Guatemala and then to the Congo, where we supported, for 5 years, we supported a program that ran 2 centers where women who had been raped in the conflict could come and recover. And they would stay in the center for 3 months, and then we would help them to return home. During the time that they were in those centers, we rented land where they could cultivate, and we also trained them to sew. And they produced some absolutely amazing embroidered squares. And those squares, it was very interesting. We didn't say to them, this is what you should produce. This is the design. These are the themes. We said to them, look, you tell your story. And then we taught them how to use the needle and thread, or the people in the centers did. And we bought them a couple of sewing machines. So we laid it all on, but we didn't say to them, you have to do this, and this is what you should produce. Now, half of those women in the Congo produced images which were quite gentle. Women and children drawing water, tilling the fields, making food. The other half produced images which were extremely violent and told the story of what happened to them as individuals in a very, very graphic manner. So explicit that I would hesitate to even describe it to you here in this interview. When we show those quilts at exhibitions, we cover them up when there are children around. They show women being pinned down on the ground. They show men with their trousers around their ankles. It's quite extraordinary how severe those images are. But of course, they are an expression of what those women went through. Nobody's listening to them. They have no lawyers. They have no police to protect them. They're completely vulnerable, and so when they have an opportunity to tell their story, they tell it whatever way they can. And these women told it very graphically. And we have shown those quilts all over the world, and they have a tremendous impact. And of course, we use them as educational tools as well to explain the problem of conflict and the impact on women in countries like the Congo.
That's powerful. Now, transitioning to another topic, you mentioned earlier the woman in Uganda, and Givology currently has a project featured on its front page from the Advocacy project that's partnering with the Gulu Disabled Persons Union about providing toilets to that area. And so can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I can indeed, and this is an issue that is of great interest to us, and I think will be of great interest to your followers and your supporters at Givology. So this project is taking place in northern Uganda, which of course was an area that was very, very badly hit by the rebellion known as the Lord's Resistance Army, a very fanatical group of rebels who created enormous problems up there, and it led to an extremely vicious and long conflict, which created a huge problem of disability in many, many thousands of people, directly through arms, landmines, but also indirectly because many people were forced into centers to deprive the rebels of support in the local population. So there's a huge problem of disability, but we have found with our partner, the Gulu Disabled Persons Union, which is a very effective group of advocates for persons with disability, that there are no accessible government toilets, or rather there are no accessible toilets in government facilities. That was what we found in 2011. We had a very good volunteer, peace fellow, who went out and worked with this organization, and she was astonished. I mean, she could not find accessible toilets for people with disability. So in 2012 and 13, we built an accessible toilet with some donations at the Gulu bus park, which is the biggest sort of bus park in that region, which was very successful. A bit too sophisticated maybe, but successful. And then in 2013, we decided that this was we decided to survey schools. And what we found was, we did a survey of 10 primary schools, 10 of the largest primary schools around Gulu, and what we found was that several NGOs had installed accessible toilets, but many of them were lacking important details, like handrails and ramps, and so were useless, and also that many of them had been vandalized by the local community. So we decided to launch a pilot project in a school called Tochi, which we did this past summer. We raised $3,000 to $4,000, and we were able to install a very strong and sturdy toilet together with water tanks. Now, we laid the groundwork for this quite carefully. I visited myself, along with our Peace Fellow, in the summer of 2014, last year. And it was very interesting because I found that it wasn't just a problem of not having a functioning toilet. There was actually a lot of bullying that was going on in the school against children with disability. And I met, one young man called Ivan who had a limp from polio, and he told me that other students in the school were trying to force him out of the school, and what they would do is they would smear feces all over the bars of the single toilet that he could use. So they were actually trying to force him out of the school. And the teachers told me the reason was that his grades were good. They were jealous of him. So it was clear that there was more. It's more than just the facilities. There was an attitude of prejudice and a kind of climate of bullying that was going on against the children with disability. And of course, kids like Ivan, if they can't go to the bathroom, there's not much point in them being in school. It's a huge disincentive for these children to attend school, and the headmistress of that school was very concerned that Ivan would drop out and that other children with disability would also drop out. So we raised this money. Actually, one of our Peace Fellows did some crowdfunding and put together some funding. We threw in a bit more, and we were able to put together a package. And the package was the toilet, the hand washing, but also a program of education in the school to reduce the level of bullying. And Amy, it was tremendously successful. In August of this year, there was an opening ceremony. The head politician from the district came, with over 1,000 visitors. Children in the school put on a play, and one of them actually acted the part of Ivan, their own colleague. We were able to give an award to 7 children who had performed really well academically, and I'm very pleased to say that one of them was Ivan. So he got a little bursary, a little scholarship, along with the 6 other children. So the whole thing was, I think, very successful. Now, sustaining that will be very difficult because the water tank has to be refilled. The toilet and the tank have to be protected from vandals. The children have to keep up the momentum. They have to buy toilet paper and soap, etc., etc., etc. So sustaining that is going to be difficult, but it seems to be working quite well. And now we want to go to more schools. We want to take that model to other schools. And we are very much hoping that Givology can help us by tapping into the generosity of your network. Parallel to that, Amy, we're going to be talking to our partner, our local Ugandan partner, the GDPU, is going to be lobbying and talking to the local government, the district government, because we want the government to integrate accessible toilets into their long-term education plan. And our target for this program is that every primary school in that district will have at least one accessible toilet, preferably more, within a period of time. We don't know how long yet, but advocating for the government and getting the government on our side is the best way to scale this idea up and to make sure that all children like Ivan can benefit from this very basic facility. So it's an exciting program, and it has a direct impact on education. We didn't know this when we got into it, but if you don't have a toilet, as I say, kids with disability can't attend school, so their right to education they're being denied their right to education, and enrollment is falling as a result.
Wow. Never think about toilets as a solution to education, but with the way you described it, definitely sounds like it's something important. So the fellow that you sent over to Uganda, how did he get involved first?
Well, let me shout out, give a shout out to our fellowship program, because we started this in 2003. I'm an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, and in 2003, I said to my class, we have these partners around the world, and if any of you would like to go and spend an interesting summer with them, we'll make that possible. And some of them did, and it grew into this, I think, very successful and well-established fellowship program. In the years since 2003, we have deployed 274 graduate students to over 45 countries, and they have made a tremendous impact. They go out for 10 weeks, short term. We also send people out for a period of 6 months to a year. And during that 10 weeks, we set them very clear targets. I think that fellowships and internships, short-term internships are quite difficult. And the reason is that it's extremely difficult to produce a long-term impact in a short period of time. 10 weeks is not very long. So we ask our fellows when they go out to help their host organization design a program, put it together. They can do a bit of crowdfunding for it if they want. We certainly encourage that. And in addition to that, we ask them to produce content, photographs, maybe video, blogs on the work that they're doing. And they can give some IT support and some IT training to their host organization. And they can also help to produce an advocacy quilt, embroidered squares, as we were talking about earlier. So there's a package there. And what we found is that that package can then be very useful to the host organization after the fellow goes. Now, the fellow in Uganda, Josh Levy, is from New York. He is quite a character, very smart, has worked at the United Nations since graduating. All of our fellows are graduates, Amy, because we put them in positions of responsibility, and they go to areas where they really do need to know how to operate. These are very difficult fellowships. These are not conventional internships or fellowships. They're really quite challenging. Anyway, Josh is a very determined, intelligent and driven young man. And he went out. He'd never been to Uganda before. He put up a crowdfunding page. He raised about $4,000. And together with the money that we put in, we were able to fund this very imaginative package. And he also helped the GDPU, his host organization, to lay the foundation for a sustainable project. Now, the fact he was only there for 10 weeks is obviously a real limitation. It means that there's a lot of pressure on us and the Ugandan partner. Communications are very difficult, as you can imagine. And we are going to have our work cut out to sustain that project. So part of, I think, the fellows' role is to create demand and motivation in the local partner organization. It's not that we go in to Uganda and say to the GDPU, you should do this. We go in and say, look, your mission is to improve access to people with disability and to build or to lobby for accessible services. Here's an idea that could really fit very nicely into this. And if they say yes, we'll help them make it happen. And if they say no, not a problem. It's their decision. Partners lead these projects. They take the decisions, they run it, and we help them to develop tools to make that possible. And all of that is done through our peace funders, who typically are aged around 25, 26, 27, 28. Young professionals who've had professional experience. Many of them have worked in the Peace Corps, people like Josh, and we're enormously proud of them. They've gone on to do some amazing work in their professional careers.
That sounds great. And it's a theme that keeps coming up over and over in education, that you have to have the support of the local community in order to truly get anything done. And now just, I know you mentioned a lot of kind of anecdotal evidence stories of how people in schools have been, how their education has improved, but what other metrics do you use to measure impact?
Well, that's a great question. And it's always coming up. And it's quite difficult because our job is capacity building, really, strengthening the capacity of local organizations, community-based organizations. I mean, that's really what our mission is. Our mission is to go in and help organizations like the GDPU in Uganda or this group of widows in Bosnia to take on larger programs and campaigns and then to produce some change, some real solid change. And of course that's a complicated task. I mean, these organizations are under tremendous pressure. They don't have enough money. They're led by individuals who are inspired and have gone through enormous sort of pressure and subjected to enormous pressure, gone through persecution. They're not necessarily great managers, Amy. And, basic stuff that is meat and potatoes for any non-profit in this country, keeping receipts, recording your receipts, reporting to your donors, that's quite difficult for these organizations. And so, our job is to help them acquire the skills and the capacity to manage programs, to work with donors, to report to donors. In other words, to evolve and get stronger as organizations. Very difficult to measure that. And the way we do it is to set very clear goals for the programs that we support. So, for example, the toilet project in Tochi in northern Uganda, and the one that we are promoting through Givology, we have set extremely specific goals for those projects. And the outputs and the outcomes that we expect from each of the activities that we'll undertake. And parallel to that, we have a reporting process where the local partner will report to us and we will then report to the donor. Now, I will say, Amy, that this, I think, this whole question of monitoring results and impacts and reporting is quite complicated, and we in the non-profit world are going to have to do a lot of head scratching over this. Because if we look at the world today, there are more and more areas which are going to be off limits, where we can't work for obvious security reasons. And I think also that larger institutional donors, the big foundations, and maybe governments as well, are going to focus their support and their money on larger organizations in areas which where you can truly do detailed monitoring. And that is going to limit their involvement. I have no data to prove this, but that's just my suspicion. We also work, for example, in Mali, and as we know, there was an attack in Mali 2 days ago. We have a very extensive program in Mali, including the north of Mali. And traditional monitoring and evaluation is very, very difficult in that country at the moment. So we're going to have to rethink this, and I think the more that we rely upon individual donors, individual people, and the less we rely on the larger institutional donors, the harder it's going to be for us to do this kind of monitoring. Institutional donors impose extremely rigorous M&E requirements, and individual donors do not. They will be attracted by an emotional appeal. I'm not saying they don't want to know how their money is spent. They do. But the kind of detailed, rigorous reporting that we've come to expect and that is required of us from large foundations and governments is, I think, I'm not sure if we're going to get that from individuals. So what I'm saying is, and I think this is extremely important, and it's actually prompted by a recent trip that I did to Mali. I was in Mali about a month ago. I think we're going to have to work very hard with our friends like Givology to develop new forms of monitoring and evaluation, and to set clear guidelines and goals. I think this is actually quite exciting, because as more and more individuals get into the business of philanthropy, we need to adjust and we need to adapt. I think the ground is shifting. I think the world out there is a more complicated place. I think many of the assumptions that we've had up to now, probably we need to rethink them. So I don't have any clear conclusion for you, and this is a very long reply to your question. But I do think that we need to step up to the plate, and we need to really rethink the way that we set goals and that we measure them, particularly if we're going to depend more and more on private donations as opposed to institutional grants, which have a very rigorous and well-established procedure for monitoring and evaluation.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of the mission of Givology too, that small donations and aggregated together can have a big impact. Just one last question. What are the advocacy projects plans for the future?
Well, I think I would say that our plans are to do what we're doing and to do it more effectively. And I think the key thing that we need to do is to sustain our programs and make sure that they can continue, and to find sustained funding and sustained support for them. It doesn't really help to go in and do a one-off toilet in Uganda, to build a one-off accessible toilet. What we have to do is we have to change opinions and minds. It's not enough to go in and open a center in Mali for women who were raped in that war, which is what we've done with our Malian partner. What we have to do is we have to go in and we have to build the confidence of Malian women and help them to resist the kind of cruelty and violence that was meted out to them in 2012, to build a society and to build values in which education and protection of women and empowerment of women is part and parcel of it's seen by everybody as being essential to society. And that requires that these small pilot projects, these interventions that we do, a toilet here, a centre there, they have to build something larger. They have to change attitudes. And that's quite difficult to do when you're running on such a small budget, depending on volunteers, and you have a small office in Washington. I'm very confident that we can do it, and we're always extremely pleased to work with partners, and I see so much energy and sort of interest and intelligence in the Givology community that we're really excited to be working with you guys. And I think this program in Uganda is pretty exciting. I mean, if you could start by putting in an accessible toilet in one school or two schools and change attitudes and bring the government around and start bringing larger investments, say from the World Bank or aid donors, bring that into the picture, then you're really making a difference in society. You're improving the lives of hundreds of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of Ugandans. And disability is a very large problem, and we need to be imaginative and innovative about the ways that we get into it and we approach it. But we have to think long term, and we have to think sustainability. So that's what we will be bearing in mind as we go forward with this Uganda project, and indeed all of the other projects that we're supporting at the moment.
Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for your support and interest. And again, I'm enormously impressed by Givology and the kind of volunteerism that you've been able to tap into. I think it's hugely impressive. It's very much, I think, in keeping with our own mission here at the Advocacy Project, which is, you can empower a lot of people. You don't need to throw money at things to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
You can really get people on your side. You can inspire them, you can motivate them. But ultimately, Amy, I would say this, and I think this is the kind of key takeaway from all of the work that we've done through the years. The best advocates on these issues are the people who are directly affected. They have a real interest in making a change. And they don't have the option of opting out, saying, okay, well, I'm fed up with this disability issue, I'm going to go off and do a master's at some university. They're in there for life. And our job as advocates and supporters is to go in there and help them. It's not to go in and impose an agenda on them, it's to go in and help them understand their needs and then address their needs. And we'll be making a contribution. For sure, it won't be all they need a lot of things, but help them, encourage them, support them, help them to get their message out, help them to raise funds, but essentially help the people who are directly affected because they are the best advocates on this.
Again, this is Iain Guest from the Advocacy Project. You're listening to the Givology Impact Series podcast. If you would like to learn more, go to givology.org. That's the site also where Iain's project with the Advocacy Project on providing clean toilets in Uganda will be featured. Thank you for joining us and see you next time.